So Beatrice Bradley is a Humanities Teaching Fellow at the University of Chicago, where she also received her PhD in English in 2020. Her current book project, Sweat, Residues of Embodiment in the Early Modern World, considers how literary texts mobilize processes of repair following the cultural trauma of illness. She charts the literary aftermath of the sweating sickness, a plague that spread across England in the 15th and 16th centuries, and examines histories of waste and identity formation more broadly. Her previous work has appeared in Milton Studies and English Literary Renaissance. Today, she'll be looking at rejuvenation in Margaret Cavendish's Blazing World.
Thank you so much, Lily. All right, I will share my screen. Okay. All right, there we go. Everyone can see this. We're all set. Okay, wonderful. First and foremost, thank you, Sophie, Arnaud, and E so much for all your organizational work and for putting together this great series. And thank you, Lily, for proposing this particular topic, which obviously I am biased, but I find so exciting. And it's just delightful to hear about. Sophie, Vanessa, and Lily and I have had such lovely conversations over the past 2 months, and I'm just very thankful for this opportunity. This is exciting. So today I'll be talking about flesh. Okay. Cavendish ends Grounds of Natural Philosophy. In fact, she ends the appendix to Grounds of Natural Philosophy with a speculative account of what she labels restoring beds, comma, or wombs. The parts of her mind debate the existence of such beds in the world, the bed's purpose being, as the name indicates, to restore creatures to their former condition of life. Cavendish compares this objective with the more quotidian rejuvenation of vegetal life, observing, a dry and withered root of some vegetable, although the parts of vegetable be, as we say, dead, yet they are often restored by the means of some arts. Also, dead sprigs will, by art, receive new life. Throughout this final section, Cavendish emphasizes the restoring beds process as natural, as opposed to by art, and she not only refers to them repeatedly as wombs, but also once compares the bed to the stomach. In response to the question whether the restoring bed was a fleshy bed, the parts of Cavendish's mind reach agreement that they were like flesh, for softness or sponginess, as also for color. The reference to color suggests skin, the flesh tone peach of a Crayola box that stands in for universal whiteness, only for Cavendish's series of metaphors to move inside the body. The bed was somewhat like the stomach of a human creature, or of the like animal, that could open and shut the orifice. And when an animal creature was put into the restoring bed, it would immediately enclose the animal. And when it had caused a perfect restoration, the restoring bed would open itself and deliver to its own liberty. The fleshy beds, seemingly closer to organs than the flesh we touch and recognizably inhabit in daily life, bring to mind the well-known floating wombs of early modern medical texts. There we go. And yet, Cavendish ultimately reorients or perhaps even rejects our attempts to visualize her restoring beds, concluding this section with a description of them as a clustered group. The center of the whole universe was the sea, and in the center of the sea was a small island, and in the center of the island was a creature like in outward form to a great and high rock. This rock creature was all covered with its own productions. These various productions were restoring beds. And I became fixated enough with the sort of impossibility of this image. I asked an artist friend of mine, I gave her this paragraph and was like, represent it as you would. And it's really science fiction-y is what she came up with. I showed it to a colleague and they compared it to Cronenberg's Fly and sort of what it evokes. So Cavendish's theorization of flesh in this section at once familiarizes the reader, acting as a stabilizing visual signifier, and renders the bed outside our full conception. The metaphor, they were like flesh in softness, sponginess, and color, promises a familiar scope of reference in life, only to refuse such familiarity by turning to the womb, then the stomach, and finally, the rocky creature from which the organs are suspended. Cavendish has framed this tend toward alienation from the start with her own disbelief, repeating prior to the appendix her doubts on restoration, only to conclude with an extensive account thereof. The movement between flesh as at once a marker of familiarity and unfamiliarity resurfaces in Butler, retroactively illuminating the move in Cavendish. In Butler's Dawn, the word flesh exists easily in translation for Lilith, a Black American woman, and Jediah, an extraterrestrial Oankali being, and yet remains distinctly divided between the categories human and alien. Jediah informs Lilith that the spaceship is flesh, only to immediately continue, more like mine than yours. What flesh does in Butler is not only move, ripple, ride, and indeed widen into a hole like the orifices of Cavendish's restoring beds, but it also positions the creatures within the ship, both human and non-human, as materially similar to the ship itself, different only in degree, more or less like. The insistent fleshiness in both texts gathers importance in positioning the respective encasements as womb-like, despite, as I suggest, flesh being an uncertain signifier for accustoming the reader to envision an encounter with the womb, and apologies for this, in the flesh. What does the sponginess of a womb feel like? This brings me to my central question of this short talk. Why, in both dystopic and utopic accounts of life extension, which so often negate the necessity of childbearing and instead produce, as Cavendish phrases it in Grounds, mature adult bodies, why do these accounts nevertheless reproduce the material conditions of birth? By which I mean the womb and the suggestion of amniotic fluid, but also the gradual progression of an unformed or forming body situated in gestational time, 9 months, 10 months, until we reach, as Cavendish phrases it, delivery. The Blazing World, which predates the 1668 publication of Grounds by 2 years, includes an account of restoration similar to the later text, albeit the revitalization of a body not after death, but in old age. The imperial race, the ruling population of the Blazing World, has orchestrated their own extended lifespan of several hundred years, rendering old age a disease state for which they have discovered the, quote, cure. When the Empress inquires of the ape men, the hybrid creatures in the occupation of chemists, the means of said cure, whether it was by nature or a special divine blessing, the ape men inform her of a medicinal gum produced by a rock or philosopher's stone. When administered to those of advanced years, the gum provokes a violent reaction in the body. It being given every day for some certain time to an old decayed man in the bigness of a little pea will first make him spit for a week or more. After this, it will bring forth vomits, humors of several colors. The elderly subject, or rather the patient, at last begins to vomit out his nose as the gum, quote, works upon his brain. The purgation continues over several months, and when it at last concludes, the ape men promise that the old decayed man will appear at the age of 20, both in shape and strength. Cavendish clearly positions restoring beds as sharing an objective, the prolongation of life, with the ape men's account of the, quote, gum. Cavendish dwells in the physicality of the process. Then the ingested gum will purge by stool, then by urine, then by sweat, and lastly by bleeding at the nose and the hemorrhoids, all which effects it will perform within the space of 6 weeks or a little more, for it does not work very strongly, but gently and by degrees. Lastly, when it has done all this, it will make the body break out into a thick scab and cause both hair, teeth, and nails to come off, which scab, being arrived to its full maturity, opens first along the back and comes off all in a piece like armor. And all this is done within the space of 4 months. After this, the patient is wrapped into a cerecloth, prepared of certain gums and juices, wherein he continues until the time of 9 months be expired from the first beginning of the cure, which is the time of a child's formation in the womb. After the cerecloth is taken away, he will appear at the age of 20, both in shape and strength. This is a remarkable scene of metamorphosis, to put it mildly, a scene that is at once explicitly larval and fetal. The language's formal excess suggests a humorous delight or authorial pleasure in this extended process of purgation. The old decayed man provides an exaggerated, even campy performance of aging. He reaches a zenith of leaky abjection, vomiting profusely, losing all his hair and teeth, even his nails, before ultimately entering into proximity with the infant. The lines, like the rock-like creature that appears at ends of grounds, test the capacities of our imagination by taking a familiar topic, the health benefits of purgation, oft heralded in early modern medical texts, and exaggerating it both in process and results. And yet embedded within the humor of this passage is an account of life extension where a portion of the population has access to a resource that prolongs life for apparently centuries. If the biopolitical function of reproduction is to uphold a dominant, self-replacing body, reproduction through childbearing here is made unnecessary. The body of the imperial race is not just reproducing itself, but enacting a fantasy of endurance. It is worth noting that for all its similarities and its shared aims with the restoring beds, this passage does not include a single reference to flesh, nor for that matter, skin. Elsewhere in the Blazing World, flesh appears as a synonym for bestial, in opposition to and paired with fish, and Cavendish only uses skin twice in the text, once in reference to a vegetable and once to a horse. And also thinking sort of about the constellation of words that are appearing across these talks, she uses complexion when she's famously talking about the different people who are like, some are purple colored, some are azure colored. There she uses the word complexion. The old man's body is, I would suggest, pointedly without flesh and without skin, desiccated and decayed in Cavendish. The scab temporarily takes the place of the wombic enclosure of the restoring bed before being exchanged with a cerecloth, indeed synthetic skin. The ingested substance offers no easy nor immediate rejuvenation. Instead, the process extends across time, making demands not only of the old man's body, but also the unknown caretakers, the hands that wrap the cerecloth, prepare the juices, which I would read as sort of an administered amniotic fluid, and take the cloth away. The old man is situated within a gestational time frame of 9 months, echoed in grounds where the process of restoration occurs over 10 months because, quote, a human creature was not fully ripe for birth before the time of 10 months. So perhaps the resurrection of a dead body requires an extra month of reparative efforts, or perhaps this is just a signaling or gesture to the uncertain time frame of pregnancy. What this particular fantasy grants us as readers is what happens to the body in the process of restoration, according to Cavendish, precisely that which the fleshy beds withhold from view. The old man regenerates his own flesh and skin, not the thick scab which arrives in metaphor, like in armor, precisely in the moment the object of comparison fails and breaks open, but that which goes unsaid, that which is revealed beneath the scab when it arrived to its full maturity. As Cavendish notes at the end of the appendix, the fleshy beds of grounds do not hold the capacity to decay, a reminder that they are only like flesh, invulnerable as the plastic quality of Butler's ship. In thinking through the capacities of restoring beds to gather scattered or dismembered bodies, Cavendish compares the bones of the animal to roots that can be coaxed back to life. The comforting parts of her mind observe, in all probability, the bones were the roots, and the bones being the roots, if that bare carcass of a man should be put into a restoring bed, all the fleshy and spongy parts, both those that were the exterior and those that were the interior, so again, we have a fleshiness that is moving from the skin all the way into the organs. Those would spring and increase to the full maturity. In this formulation, flesh is an infinitely renewable resource. It is simultaneously the marker of time, progression, and realization. In closing, I want to suggest that the insistent flagging of gestational time for Cavendish offers a way of thinking about embodiment in the episodic. Maturity in grounds refers to a creature who has arrived to a state of, quote, perfection. Cavendish promises that those that were restored should return to perfection by degrees, continuing to explain how persons in advanced stage would return to a preceding form, whereas others who died young would advance to it. Both youth and age shall meet in perfection. Perfection in early modern English suggests completion and maturity, here the completion of a life form from infancy into adulthood, rather than flawlessness. This articulation in grounds nevertheless positions the majority of life stages as deviant, oriented around a brief, fleeting window, forever looking back or forever anticipating a more desirable form of being, perhaps the single year of 20. The old man of the Blazing World never arrives at this promised state. Indeed, perhaps the fullest account of embodiment we receive in the text lingers in gestational time, tracking the disruptions of the body, degree by degree, and provides us with a way of thinking about embodiment in which its seeming failures, the way in which a body that deviates from how we regularly inhabit it, can render our own flesh unfamiliar, are non-continuous and non-linear, but instead episodic. The old man may occupy a teleology oriented toward perfection. He will appear at the age of 20, but he never quite reaches the futurity of that will. In doing so, Cavendish revises the understanding of old age and sick bodies as inherent endpoints, instead reminding us how often we experience the body as episodic, looking towards some future time in which we will feel better, more awake, less tired, or fearing the onset of a tickle in the throat, a scratchy breath, decline. She reminds the reader how the body in upheaval or stasis can both be temporary conditions, how to be embodied is to vacillate in and out of comprehension, and that all flesh is just a scab waiting to form. Thank you.